The last page of the album held a single photograph. It was a standard 4x6 print, slipped carefully behind the protective plastic sheet. The caption, written in my mother's elegant, looping cursive, was just 5 words. The 4 of us, finally. The photo showed my parents, younger and unburdened by the years that would follow. It showed me, a child with missing front teeth. And it showed a boy I had never seen before, standing between my mother and me, his hand resting on my shoulder. Beneath the caption was another, smaller note in the same script. Tell Asha after Florida, start with his name. The date range on the album's spine, a sticker from the photo lab, was July 2002. The discovery did not trigger a cascade of forgotten memories. It did not unlock a hidden room in my mind. It simply presented a new, indisputable fact that contradicted the entire architecture of my childhood. There were 4 people in the photograph. I only knew 3. My mother had a plan to explain the 4th, a plan that, for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, was never executed. The photograph wasn't a memory. It was a record of an event, and the note was the record of an intention. The story I had always told myself about my family was incomplete. The foundation had a crack I never knew existed, and I understood, with a certainty that required no emotional affirmation, that everything had to be re-examined. That was the end of the story, but not where it began. To understand the photograph, you have to go back to that morning, to the boxes and the silence. It had been 3 months since my mother's funeral, and the apartment was still a fortress of her possessions. My father had called me the week before, his voice flat with a request that sounded like a surrender. He needed help. He had decided to sell the place and move into a smaller condo, and the task of sorting through 3 decades of accumulated life was more than he could manage alone. So I drove down on a Thursday, prepared for a long weekend of methodical work. Our collaboration was polite and efficient. We worked in separate rooms to avoid getting in each other's way, a habit we'd developed long before my mother's illness. He tackled the study, a room filled with financial records and books. I took the hall closet, the designated archive of family history. It was packed with banker's boxes, each meticulously labeled in my mother's handwriting. Asha, schoolwork K5, holiday cards 1990 to 1999. Appliance, warranties, and manuals. My job was to sort them into 3 categories: keep, donate, or discard. It was a simple set of instructions for a complicated task. My father and I had different appetites for the past. I saw it as a data set to be organized and understood. He saw it as a territory best left unexplored. A few times, I brought him an object, asking if it held any specific value. A tarnished silver locket, a program from a community theater production. Each time, he would look at it for a moment, offer a non-committal, "Whatever you think is best, honey," and then turn back to his own stack of papers. The message was clear. He was focused on the logistics of vacating the space, not on curating its emotional contents. I found the photo album in a box labeled Vacations and Travel. It was a standard store-bought album with a plain blue cover. A sticker on the spine read Florida 2003, but the 2003 had been crossed out with a ballpoint pen, and Summer 2002 was written beside it. This was the trip I had always thought of as the last good time, the last family vacation before the fractures started to show, before my parents' arguments became a constant, low-grade hum in the background of our lives. It was the summer after I finished 4th grade. In my memory, it existed as a series of disconnected, positive moments: a theme park, a beach, a hotel with a swimming pool. I had always understood that memory was an unreliable narrator. It polishes the good and erases the mundane. But photographs were different. They were supposed to be artifacts, proof of what actually happened. They could correct the record, fill in the blanks. I carried the album into the living room and sat on the floor, deciding to take a break from the boxes. My father was in the kitchen, making a phone call about utilities. The apartment was quiet, except for the low murmur of his conversation. The album was organized with my mother's typical precision. It was not just a collection of pictures. It was a curated narrative. The first page held the plane tickets and boarding passes, tucked into the corners of the plastic sleeve. Delta, LGA to MCO, July 12, 2002. 3 passengers, David, Eleanor, and Asha Vance. The return tickets were for July 26th, a 2-week trip. I turned the pages slowly, The photos were exactly as I half remembered them. There was a picture of me in front of the iconic castle at the theme park, squinting. A photo of my dad pretending a dolphin was speaking to him at an aquatic park. A picture of my mom and me on a hotel balcony, our hair styled by the humidity. The captions were brief and factual. Asha at the Magic Kingdom. Dad and his new friend. Mom and me. About a third of the way through the album, the boy appeared. The first photo showed the four of us, my parents, me, and him, standing in front of a fountain. He looked a few years older than me, maybe 12 or 13. The caption simply read, "Group shot at the pier." There was no name, no explanation. He was just there. In the next photo, he and I were sitting on a bench, eating ice cream cones. Then another, of all of us at the entrance to a different park. He appeared in 5 photographs in total, always in a group setting, always with a neutral, descriptive caption. At the park entrance. Dinner at the Italian place. His presence was an anomaly. I had no memory of him. Not his face, not his name, not a single interaction. It was possible, I reasoned, that he was the child of a family my parents had met on vacation. It happened. People made temporary friends, took group photos, and then went their separate ways. But something about the neat, consistent inclusion felt different. It felt intentional. The album contained more than just photos. My mother had saved everything. Tucked behind a picture of a sunset was a restaurant receipt, dated July 16th, 2002. Dinner for 4. Behind another was a folded piece of hotel stationery. On it, in my mother's handwriting, was what looked like a list of talking points. It was a draft, full of crossouts and revised phrases. First, start by explaining we wanted to tell her sooner. 2. The situation was complicated. Legal reasons. 3. It was never a secret, just a story we had to wait to tell. 4. He wants to know you. The last line was underlined twice. My focus sharpened. This was not a casual acquaintance. This was a plan. I flipped through the remaining pages more quickly, my search no longer casual. Near the back, I found it. Tucked behind a photo of just my parents, there was a folded sheet of paper, torn from a small legal pad. At the top was the name of an organization, Seaview Child and Family Services. Below it, a handwritten case number and a name I didn't recognize, a social worker perhaps. My mother had drawn a box around it. This album was not a simple vacation chronicle. It was the documentation of a project. The trip had a purpose that went far beyond theme parks and beaches. The pieces were there, but they formed a picture I couldn't yet see clearly. The boy, the agency, the careful notes about how to tell me something important. My mother, the meticulous planner, had constructed this entire experience, and the album was her evidence. The vacation was the stage, and we were all actors in a play, but only she and my father knew the script. My father finished his call and walked into the living room, holding a glass of water. He saw me on the floor, with the album open across my lap. "Find something interesting?" he asked. His tone was light, but his posture was guarded. I didn't look up. I pointed to a photograph where the boy was standing next to my mother. "Who is this?" I asked. The question was direct, stripped of any preamble. He was silent for a moment. I could hear him set the glass down on the coffee table. "That was a long time ago, Asha." "I know when it was," I said, keeping my voice even. "The album is dated, July 2002. Who is he?" "He was a boy we met down there," he said. The hesitation was slight, but it was there. "We met him, or you and Mom met him?" I looked up at him then. His expression was unreadable. It was a look he had perfected over the years, a careful neutrality that conceded nothing. "It's complicated," he said, the same words from my mother's note. It was the phrase he always used to shut down a conversation. "This album seems to suggest it was a planned meeting," I said, tapping the folded paper with the agency's name on it. Seaview Child and Family Services, a case number, a list of points on how to tell me about him. This wasn't a chance encounter. He sighed, a quiet exhalation of air. He ran a hand over his face. "Your mother handled all of that. She was the one who kept the records." "But you were there," I pressed. "You're in the pictures. What was the plan? Who was he?" He walked over to the window and looked down at the street. It was a classic avoidance tactic. Change the subject by changing the view. We have a lot to get through today, Asha. Maybe we can talk about this later. No, I said, my voice firm but not loud. I think we need to talk about it now. For 23 years, I've had a version of this family's story in my head. Today, I found out that story is missing a main character. I need you to fill in the blank. He turned back from the window. I can't. Not all of it. Your mother, she had the timeline in her head, the details. It was her project, really. The way he said it, her project, made it sound like a hobby, like her stained glass work or her gardening. It was a deliberate distancing. I recognized the pattern. Whenever a topic involved emotional complexity, my father receded, framing my mother as the sole proprietor of our family's inner life. It had been their dynamic for as long as I could remember. She was the engine. He was the passenger. So, you're telling me, I said, choosing my words with care, that you went on a 2-week family vacation, met a child multiple times through a formal agency, photographed him, and planned to tell me about him, but you don't remember the details. I'm saying it's not a simple story to tell in 5 minutes while we're trying to pack up a life's worth of things, he countered. He was not angry, just weary. He looked at the box of albums. Maybe we should put that away for now. We can come back to it. I knew I wouldn't get anything more from him at that moment. Pushing would only make him retreat further. I closed the album and placed it on the coffee table, a silent promise that the conversation was paused, not concluded. I stood up and went back to the hall closet, the unspoken truce hanging in the air between us. An hour later, my father announced he was going out to get sandwiches. The moment the apartment door closed behind him, I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts and found my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister. She and my mom had been close, speaking on the phone nearly every day. If anyone else knew the story, it would be her. She answered on the second ring. Asha, honey, how are you holding up? How's your dad? We're okay, I said. We're at the apartment, starting the clear out. Oh, that's a hard job. Be good to yourselves. I took a breath. Carol, I need to ask you about something. I found a photo album from a vacation we took in 2002. In Florida, there was a pause on her end. It was brief, but noticeable. Okay, she said slowly. There's a boy in the pictures, someone I don't know. And I found a note from Mom about an agency, Seaview Child and Family Services. The note said she was planning to tell me about him. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, weighted with a caution I hadn't heard before. Asha, where did you find this? In a box of photos in the closet. Dad is here, but he won't talk about it. He says it was Mom's project. I heard her sigh, a sound so similar to my mother's, it was startling. In some ways, he's not wrong, she said. Eleanor drove that whole process. She believed it was the right thing to do. What process? I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. Who was the boy? Listen to me, Carol said, her tone shifting from nostalgic to instructional. This is not something you're going to solve in an afternoon. Your mother had a child before she met your father, a son. She gave him up for adoption when she was very young. The information landed without fanfare. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered cleanly. A son. My brother. She was 19, Carol continued, her voice a steady narration. Her parents, your grandparents, insisted on it. It was a different time. A closed adoption. She was told she would never have contact. So, the trip to Florida. Technology changed things, she said. The internet. Adoption reunion registries. Your mother started searching in the late 90s. It took her years, but she found him. The agency, Seaview, was the intermediary that managed the reunion. The adoptive parents had to agree to it. The boy had to agree to it. The trip to Florida was the first time they were going to meet in person. I looked at the album on the coffee table. The pieces were slotting into place. So the plan was to introduce him to the family, to me. That was your mother's hope, Carol confirmed. She wanted to do it carefully. She didn't want to disrupt anyone's life, especially not yours or his. She had this whole idea worked out. They would meet him first, just her and David. Then they would introduce you in a casual setting. No pressure, just a vacation. And if it went well, they would tell you everything afterward and figure out a way to move forward as a bigger family. Her words painted a picture of my mother that was both familiar and new. The strategic planner, the loving mother, but also a woman with a history I never knew, a loss she had carried silently for decades. "What happened?" I asked. "Why didn't she tell me?" "I don't know the whole story," Carol admitted. "I know the trip happened. I know they met him. But something must have changed afterward. The communication seemed to stop. Eleanor never talked about it again. Not to me, anyway. When she got sick, I think all her energy went into fighting the cancer. The past got put on a shelf." She paused again. "Asha, be careful with this. That album is going to raise more questions than it answers. And your father, he may not have the answers you're looking for. He was a participant, but your mother was the architect." We ended the call a few minutes later. I felt a strange sense of calm. The mystery was gone, replaced by a concrete history. I had a brother. Or, more accurately, my mother had a son. Whether he was my brother was a question that had yet to be answered. When my father returned with the sandwiches, I had the album open again. I had spent the last 20 minutes cross-referencing the photographs with the artifacts my mother had saved. I was reconstructing the timeline, not of a vacation, but of an introduction. I had found two key pieces of evidence. The first was the receipt from the Italian restaurant. It was dated July 14th, 2002, and the total was for 2 adults and 1 child. The photo of my parents with the boy, which I now knew was my brother, must have been taken before that dinner. The caption just said, "A lovely evening." The second piece was a set of 3 mini golf scorecards, dated July 15th. All 3 were filled out. 1 for Dad, 1 for Mom, 1 for Evan. The name was there, in my mother's handwriting. Evan. The scorecards were tucked behind a photo of the 3 of them standing by a windmill obstacle. I was not in that picture. The first group photo that included me was dated July 16th, the one at the pier. My ticket stub for the boat tour that day was in the album. There were 4 of them. The sequence was clear. My parents met Evan alone on or before July 14th. They spent time with him, just the 3 of them, on the 15th. Then, on the 16th, they introduced me. The casual outings, the ice cream, the theme park, it was all a carefully managed trial period. I was being observed. He was being observed. We were all part of my mother's meticulous, hopeful experiment. I found another document I had missed on the first pass. It was a single page, folded into a tiny square and tucked into the album's back pocket. It was another draft, this one in the form of a letter to the adoptive parents. It was written on the same hotel stationery. "Dear Mark and Sandra," it began, "thank you again for making this possible. These past few days have been more than we could have hoped for. Evan is a wonderful young man, and you have clearly done an incredible job. We believe the introduction to Asha went well. She enjoyed his company, and we hope the feeling was mutual. Our plan, as we discussed, is to proceed in 3 steps. First, we will tell Asha the full story upon our return home. We have prepared for this and believe she is old enough to understand. Second, we would like to arrange for a phone call between Asha and Evan so they can speak directly. Third, we hope to plan another visit, perhaps over the holidays, where we can all be together again. We are committed to a process that respects your role as his parents and honors the life you have given him. We believe that with open communication and shared goodwill, we can build a future where..." The letter ended there, mid-sentence. It was as if she had been interrupted and never had the chance to finish the thought. Or perhaps she decided the words were not right. Whatever the reason, the draft was a testament to her ambition, a blueprint for a future that never came to be. I looked up at my father, who was unwrapping the sandwiches at the kitchen counter, his back to me. "His name was Evan," I said. It wasn't a question. He stopped what he was doing but didn't turn around. "Yes. You met him alone first, with Mom. Then you introduced me a couple of days later." He turned around slowly. He looked at the open album, at the scattered papers I had arranged on the floor. He seemed to understand that evasion was no longer an option. He pulled out a chair from the dining table and sat down, gesturing for me to do the same. The sandwiches sat forgotten on the counter. "Your mother found him through a registry in 2001, he began, his voice low and steady. It was all done through the agency, very formal. Letters back and forth, first to the agency, then they would pass them to the adoptive parents. It took almost a year of that before they agreed to a meeting. They were good people, cautious, protective of their son, rightfully so. They lived near Orlando, he continued. That's why the vacation was in Florida. It was the only way to make it happen without it being some big official event. Your mother wanted it to feel normal as something like that could be. He looked at me, a directness in his eyes I hadn't seen all day. We were terrified, Asha, both of us. What if he hated us? What if we disrupted his life? What if you felt replaced? Your mother spent months reading books, talking to counselors. She had a plan for every contingency. The trip was the plan, I said. It was the first step, he corrected, and it went well, better than we'd hoped. Evan was a great kid, smart, quiet, a little shy. He and your mom, they connected. It was something to see. He had her eyes. And you and he got along. You were just kids. You played video games in the hotel arcade. You didn't ask who he was, and he didn't offer. We told you he was the son of a friend of your mom's from work. You accepted it. He paused, looking down at his hands on the table. The plan was to tell you as soon as we got home. The letter your mother was drafting to his parents laid it all out. We were optimistic. For the first time, your mother felt like she could put this piece of her past right. Not erase it, but integrate it. So why didn't you? I asked, the question at the heart of it all. What happened between the end of that trip and now? This was the part he struggled with. He got up and started pacing the small space between the table and the kitchen. It fell apart, slowly and then all at once. When we got back, the adoptive father got a job transfer. They were moving to the Pacific Northwest. The distance suddenly became a real obstacle. Then there were legal questions. We had consulted a lawyer, and the open adoption laws at the time were murky. The adoptive parents got nervous. They asked for some space, to let Evan settle into his new school before we re-established contact. Your mother agreed. She didn't want to push. A few months turned into 6, he went on. Your mother sent a holiday card. She got one back. Then, she wrote a letter in the spring and didn't hear back for a month. The communication became strained. Not hostile, just infrequent. We got the sense that they were having second thoughts, that we had opened a door they weren't sure they wanted to walk through. We were afraid of losing the connection entirely, so we backed off. He stopped pacing and leaned against the counter. And then life just happened. You were starting middle school. Things at my job got complicated. Your mother and I were having our own problems. The momentum was lost. The file, the album. It went into a box in the closet. It became this thing we were going to get to later. Later became next year. Then later became the year after that. And then your mother got sick. He looked at me, his face a mask of regret. Her illness took everything, all our focus, all our energy. The past was a luxury we couldn't afford. We were just trying to get through the present. By the time we knew she wasn't going to get better, it felt too late, too cruel to drop this on you. And honestly, Asha, I think she was ashamed. She felt like she had failed. She had found him, and she had lost him again. He sat back down at the table. There is no good reason we didn't tell you, he said quietly. There's just a long list of poor ones. Fear, procrastination, bad timing. It's a failure on our part. On my part. I should have made sure you knew. I'm sorry. The apology was simple and unadorned. It was the most direct emotional statement I had heard from him in years. We sat in silence for a long time. The story was finally told. I spent the rest of the afternoon taking inventory, not of the apartment's contents, but of the facts I now possessed. I had a brother, or a half-brother. His name is Evan. He was born in 1989. He was given up for adoption through Seaview Child and Family Services. His adoptive parents' names are Mark and Sandra. In the summer of 2002, he lived near Orlando, Florida. Shortly after, he moved to the Pacific Northwest. The last known communication was a postcard my mother had saved, tucked into a different book. It was from Seattle, dated 2005. It was a simple picture of the skyline. The note on the back just said, "Hope you are well. E." It was the last piece of evidence in the file. The list of what I didn't know was much longer. Where does he live now? Is his name still Evan? What does he do? Is he married? Does he have children? Does he remember that trip in 2002 with the same conflicted clarity? Does he have any desire for contact? Or did he close that door willingly, content with the life he had? Did my mother's search cause him pain or confusion? I was standing at a moral crossroads. On one path was an active search. I had a name, an agency, a last known city. With modern search tools, I could probably find him. It would be an act of claiming a history I was entitled to. On the other path was restraint. It was a path of respecting the silence that had settled over the past 2 decades, of honoring the privacy of a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a stranger. His adoptive family had requested space. My parents had granted it. Who was I to override that decision, to force a reunion that might be unwanted? My duty to my own story felt significant. My mother had wanted me to know him. She had a plan. But my duty to his autonomy felt even greater. He was not a character in my story to be discovered. He was the protagonist of his own, and I had no right to write myself into it without an invitation. That evening, after my father had gone to bed, I sat at the dining room table and opened my laptop. I didn't search for his name. Instead, I opened a blank document and began to draft a message. It was not a message to him, but a letter of inquiry, addressed to either Seaview, Child and Family Services, if it still existed, or a general adoption registry. To whom it may concern, I wrote. I am writing to inquire about a closed adoption that took place in or around 1989. My mother, Eleanor Vance, was the birth mother. The child, a boy given the name Evan at birth, was placed with a family through your agency or one of its predecessors. In 2002, contact was initiated and a meeting took place. I am Eleanor's daughter, Asha Vance. I have only recently learned of my brother's existence. My mother passed away recently, and I am trying to respectfully and cautiously understand my family history. I do not wish to intrude on his life, but I want to make it known that if he has any interest in contact or in receiving information about his birth mother's life and passing, I am open to providing it through a mediated channel. Please find my contact information below. I will await a response and will take no further action until and unless he expresses a desire for me to do so. I read the message over and over. It felt balanced. It offered an opening without making a demand. It centered his agency, his choice. I saved the document to my desktop with the file name Inquiry Draft. I did not send it. It was a step, but a measured one. A plan, just like my mother would have made. The next day, as we were packing the last of the boxes from the study, I found a small, sealed envelope at the bottom of my mother's desk drawer. In her handwriting, it simply said, "For Asha." I took it to the other room to open it. It wasn't a long letter. "My dearest Asha," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you have found the things I couldn't bring myself to share. I hope you have found the album. I hope you have learned the story of your brother, Evan. And I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me and your father for our silence. It was not born of a lack of love, but an abundance of fear. We were afraid of doing it wrong, and in our fear, we did nothing at all, which was the worst mistake. I don't know what the future holds, or what you will choose to do with this knowledge. That decision is now yours, as it always should have been. I cannot give you back the years, or change the past. Memory is not a place you can revisit, only a text you can learn to read with care. Whatever you do, I trust you to do it with the same compassion and intelligence you bring to everything. Know that my greatest hope was to one day see the two of you together, my 2 beautiful children. Know that you were and are the great joy of my life. All my love, Mom." I folded the letter and put it inside the front cover of the Florida 2002 album. I took a plain white label and a pen. On the label, I wrote, "The Story of Evan." Learned August 14th, 2025. I stuck the new label on the album's spine, right below the one my mother had made. I didn't put the album in a box to be stored or donated. I placed it in my own bag to take home. It was part of my story now. It deserved a place on my shelf. I went back to the living room. The morning light was hitting the empty spaces on the walls where pictures used to hang. I thought about that photograph on the final page, the one captioned, "The 4 of us, finally." For my mother, it was a moment of arrival, the culmination of a long and painful journey. For me, it was the beginning of a new one. The past itself is fixed. You can't get it back. You can't relive a 2002 vacation or undo decades of silence. But what it means, what you do with it, that is not fixed at all. I don't know if I will ever meet my brother, but I know he exists. And for now, learning how to live with that knowledge is enough. It has to be.